Your first speaker is a member of St. John's class of 1995 and the recent author of a legacy, Unrivaled, the story of John Gagliardi, which is available for purchase up front over here. I'll remind you of that again later. During his time as a student in the early 90s, he played football for 4 years under Coach John Gagliardi, earning an academic All-American honors his senior year and later becoming close personal friends with Gilardi, the man himself, for more than a decade. He earned his master's degree in taxation from the University of Minnesota Twin Cities and is currently an associate professor of accounting and finance at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming your first presenter of the night, Boz Bostrom, everybody. Give it up for him.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Jared, for that wonderful introduction. I want to take you back to August of 1991. It was my first football practice at St. John's University. It was a hot and humid August day, and it was unmistakably a football practice because there was a bunch of footballs and a bunch of guys running around with helmets and shoulder pads and jerseys on, but there was definitely something different. There was no practice pants. Everyone was wearing shorts. There were no blocking sleds, no tackling dummies. No one was tackling to the ground or really hitting each other that hard, and that was dictated by the coaches. Well, I'd come from a smash-mouth football program in Stillwater, Minnesota, and we were taught that even in practice, you were supposed to try to dominate your opponent. And so early on in my first practice, I got tangled up with an offensive lineman, and at the end of the play, I let our momentum carry us, and I just tossed him to the ground. And I knew I wasn't really supposed to do that, but at the same time, it was my first practice, and I wanted to show everyone that this freshman from Stillwater was to be taken seriously. And so I stood above him and started to smile a little bit, and the smile was interrupted when a tall, lanky defensive back came up and grabbed me by the shirt right here and said, "Boz, that's not the way we do things around here." And then he galloped away just kind of as quickly as he had shown up. And I was a little scared, to be honest. As a freshman, I had just upset one of the senior leaders of the team. But I helped up the opponent. And needless to say, I went 4 more years with never throwing another opponent to the ground. Now, what I took away from that experience is that senior had done that because he was empowered by our coach. He was empowered to take leadership and instill the coach's values in the younger players. None of you were there that day, I don't think. None of you were there, but you know who that senior was, all right? That senior was none other than Denis Mcdonough. And of course, you all know who Denis Mcdonough is, and we're very proud of Denis as he's gone on to be the chief of staff, obviously, for President Obama for Obama's complete second term. Yeah, there's Denis in his little football jersey right there. But the coach who had made all that possible, of course, was John Gagliardi. And when you think of John Gagliardi, you probably think of 489 wins, the most winning coach in the history of college football. You think of 4 national championships, 27 conference championships. Maybe you think that he coached for 70 years, getting to start at 16 years old when his high school coach had gone away to World War II. Maybe that's what you think of. Maybe you think of the fact that the Division III Player of the Year, the equivalent of the Heisman Trophy, is named after John, the Gilardi Trophy. And we were just fortunate enough to have the 3rd ever Johnny win that trophy this past year. Maybe that is the type of stuff that you think of when you think about John. But when I think about John, all that stuff is pretty cool, but it pales in comparison to the role that he had in developing about 3,000 young men into men of character. And I was so enthralled by his story that after I came back to St. Ben's and St. John's as a prof and got to know him a little bit better, I decided to take a sabbatical in the fall of 2012 just to understand a little bit more about him and what made him tick, and wrote a book called A Legacy Unrivaled. Along the way, I interviewed over a couple hundred of his former players in addition to spending a lot of time with John. And I asked them, why was John so successful for so long? And I took all their replies, and I'm an accountant, so I put it in an Excel spreadsheet and did some sorts and stuff like that, right? But color-coded. But I took all the replies and boiled it down to 11 keys to winning. There were such keys as setting high expectations, instilling confidence, being open and adaptable, treating others as you would like them to treat you. But the one that I keep coming back to is he empowered others. So what does it really mean to empower others? You know, what it doesn't mean is to give a bunch of 18 to 22-year-old testosterone-filled meatheads, all right, and I can say that because I was one of them. It does not mean that you give them unlimited power and unlimited freedom. It means to create some structure and then create some goals and help them try to achieve those. Up on the screen right now, we see a picture of Tom Love. Tom played for John in the mid-50s. And Tom, if you don't know of him, owns a bunch of Love's truck stops. There's only one in Minnesota. That's down in Owatonna. I last visited it about 5 years ago on my way to a George Strait concert down in Kansas City. Any George Strait fans in here? Thank goodness. All right, I can continue. But he owns a few hundred of them down south. And in fact, Tom, the former Johnny alum, is the 205th most wealthy person in the world. He flew in to speak in John's leadership lessons class, a class I co-teach with John. And we asked him, Tom, what was the secret of your success? And Tom said, I hire A players and then I get out of the way. Tom empowers those A players. When we also are thinking about empowerment, why do we do that? I mean, get out of the way. We have some control freaks in the room tonight, I imagine. Any control freaks in the room, you can either raise your hand or you can point at them, all right, if you know them. It sounds scary to get out of their way, right? And the truth is we might actually be able to get better results in the short run by micromanaging someone. But what does that do for them in the long term? What does that do once they finally leave our care? It doesn't do anything for them. If we create a comfortable culture of empowerment, we can set them up for long-term success. Now, I've name-dropped with a billionaire and a chief of staff, but it's not just those two types of people. There are dozens, hundreds, and thousands of success stories just like that. 2 consecutive chief administrative officers of the Mayo Clinic were Johnny football players. You might not have known that, in charge of tens of thousands of people. There was countless doctors, lawyers. I like to use the personal example of the powerhouse. That's the powerhouse on campus, especially for you alums. It is still standing. That's where I lived my senior year with 7 football players. I'm surprised they didn't tear it down. But when I look at this next picture that comes up on the screen for you right here, just in my classmates, we have the All-American tailback who's an anesthesiologist, the injured quarterback who's a lawyer. We have the nose guard who's a dentist. We have the linebacker who's an entrepreneur, business owner, the tight end who's a CFO, the strong safety who is an executive in the hospitality industry, and some random offensive guard dude who went on to be a professor, so you might be the one that went wrong. But that was just an example of my house and the leaders that were developed. You know, how did John develop those? Through his culture of empowerment. He didn't require us to lift weights, all right? He said, just do it if you want. So what did we do? We pushed each other to do it. We enjoyed it. We pushed each other harder because it was for the benefit of the team. He didn't require us to run wind sprints. He said, if you don't feel like you got enough running in during practice, go ahead and just do some running after practice. I'm not going to force you to. So every Tuesday through Thursday, he didn't make us, but we pushed each other to do that. We took that leadership because he empowered us to do so. And we pushed each other harder than he would have. And we liked it. And also when I think of empowerment, we did not have a playbook at St. John's. All right, you just had to learn the plays by listening to John and listening to the upperclassmen who would teach you about the plays. It didn't always work. And in fact, my junior year, I had not learned one play well enough. I was playing defensive line at that time. I missed my cue, and McAllister scored a touchdown. And it was disastrous because instead of winning the game 74-0, we only won 74-6. True story. Now, one would think no big deal, but when we got to films on that Monday, that play was rewound over and over and over again. And I was criticized, appropriately so, for that. What did I take from that? I was empowered not only to learn every play that I needed to make for the rest of my St. John's football career, but I was empowered to know what I was going to be doing for the rest of my life. Whenever I have questions, I take responsibility to figure that one out. If you ask John what his favorite memories are and what his favorite part about being such a successful coach was for so long, it's that he's had so many players that have gone on to great things that then they give him credit for, and they say that he had a small part in that success. And one of them is a gentleman by the name of Brian Hayes. And Brian, I played with him in the early 90s. He was a second-string offensive lineman. And when John turned 90 this past November, a bunch of people sent him cards and letters and emails. And with Brian's permission, I'm going to share what Brian wrote in closing. Brian said, "I was the patrol lieutenant when a group of deputies and I responded to an incident where a subject had brutally beaten his mother and stepfather. When I led the deputies down a narrow staircase, the subject attacked me and stabbed me in the leg. After I was able to disarm the subject, I had to go back to the example that you, John, showed of trust in your players, which in this case was my deputies. I had suffered an approximately 6-inch gash to my left leg, which was bleeding profusely, and I was not in position to direct the other deputies. But these other deputies performed extremely well in containing the subject and then saving my life with applying a tourniquet. 3 years later, I'm still in recovery from the incident as I lost hearing in my right ear from my partner firing his handgun at the subject, and I've had 3 shoulder surgeries with a 4th on the way to deal with the injuries I suffered in disarming the subject. But I'm alive. And I want to thank you for your example, because letting people do their job is why I believe that the incident was handled so well. Although you last coached me 25 years ago, I still remember and use what you taught me today." So my final question as I leave you is, are you empowering those under your care? If you're an employer, are you empowering your employees? Are you empowering your kids if you're a parent? Are you empowering your students or your players if you're a coach or teacher? Because if you will see the benefits long after they're under your care. Thanks everyone for coming out tonight, and I hope you enjoy it.